Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you new here, my name is Donna, and for those of you not new, thank you so much for coming back and enjoying my channel and supporting me, and I just love you all so much, and thank you so much for coming. Today, as you saw by the title, I'm sure, I am doing another ranking video. It is a ranking video that I have been promising my friend here in the comments section for a while now, and it is ranking all of my ABH palettes. I do have 10 of the regular 14 pan palettes. I have been purchasing ABH since I pretty much got into this makeup thing about 4 years ago. I think my very first palette from them was, of course, Modern Renaissance. I jumped into this makeup scene right about the same time that that palette was really seeing its height of hoopla, right? I didn't pick it up until much later in my YouTube, I guess, venture. And the biggest reason why is because when I first came onto this scene, I wasn't much into reds and neutrals and really didn't see how they could complement me and honestly, I purchased that palette and within weeks it was my very favorite palette to use. And even though it is the oldest, one of the oldest palettes in my collection, it is still going strong. I still love utilizing it. I feel like it is still a palette that is just an everyday kind of palette for me. And I did want to go through my palettes and rank them. There are still 2 palettes in here that I haven't used, so I am ranking them quasi-dependent on whether I think that where I think that they should come in this lineup based on preferences, based on whatever. With that said, little disclaimer here, I do have 10, so there is going to be a palette that comes in at number 10, right? If that is a palette that you love, don't be offended. If I am honest, ABH is a stan brand for me. I love their palettes. So there isn't one of them here, even if I haven't used them, that I can't imagine that I would not love. So don't get offended. This is just makeup. It's just makeup. So with that said, let's go ahead and rank the palettes, and I'm going to start with number 10. So number 10 for me is going to be, I didn't really think this through, I guess. Number 10 for me is going to be Riviera. Riviera is coming in at number 10 because, number 1, it is a palette that I haven't used yet. So one of the things that I told my friend in the comments that I would do with this video is try and put up looks using said palette wherever it is in the ranking that I have done with said palette. I haven't used this palette yet, so I cannot put up any looks that I've done with this palette. But one of the reasons why this is coming in at number 10 is because this is, of all the ABH palettes I have, this is one that I didn't purchase on purpose. I did get it in a Beautylish Lucky Bag. It was my first Beautylish Lucky Bag, and it wasn't one that I was going to purchase. I do have the Alyssa Edwards palette by them, and I feel like the color stories in these two are very similar, and I chose Alyssa Edwards over this one. So I don't know, it just wasn't a color, it just wasn't one I was interested in, to be honest. With that said, I do think that in and of itself it is very pretty. It's got really pretty, you know, pops of bright. It's also got really pretty neutral tones in it. I love all these shimmers on top. I can see me liking this palette at some point, but it is a palette that I wasn't going to purchase. So for that reason, this does have to come in at number 10 for me. At number 9, and again, simply because I have not used it, but also because it doesn't really fall into a color story that I see myself loving, and you will see when I pop it up here. It honestly was a palette that I purchased simply because I had to have it, because I have them all. The ABH Sultry, like, I know this is so many people's favorite, but I cannot wrap my head around this color story. I have not purchased the Natasha Denona, and y'all know that she is my #1. I have not purchased her Glam palette for the same reasons. It is just not a color story that I can get behind. I also really hate this Papa Salmon in here, if I'm honest. Yeah, I am curious about the palette, but it was purchased and then sits kind of in my ABH section without me going into it, dipping into it, touching it, because it, again, was one that I wasn't going to purchase, and then felt some kind of like, I don't know, some kind of way about the fact that I didn't own Sultry, but I owned all the rest of them. So when it came in the box set this past holiday season, I did pick up that box set just for this palette. So that is the reason why this one has to be #9 in my collection. All right, so now we're getting into the ones that I have used. So I would say my #8 would have to be, oh man, the Norvina palette. And the reason why I'm putting this at #8 is because I just expected a lot more from this palette and didn't really get it. I feel like it should have been a lot more purple. I feel like it should have had some really deeper purples than what it has. This periwinkle is probably the prettiest shade of periwinkle I've ever in my life encountered, but it definitely doesn't pull the purple that I want it to be, and it is the grounding shade in this palette that makes this palette look purple. And it's not even a purple shade, it's periwinkle. So it looks very blue next to the rest of the palette, in addition to the fact that it is very, very neutral. If you take this periwinkle out and this purple out and these two pinks, the rest of it is just browns. It's just different shades of brown, and y'all know how I feel about browns. So that is the reason why this palette would have to come in at #8 for me. I do have some really gorgeous looks that I pulled from this palette. I do like this palette. Again, I'm just going to disclaim this. There isn't one of these palettes that I don't like, because I promise you, I love ABH. They're my favorite formula, or one of my favorite formulas. Top 3 formulas. This just isn't it. This one wasn't, it isn't one that I think of when I think of top 5 ABH palettes for me. The next one is going to have to be the Carli Bybel. So you guys, I love a couple of the shades in this palette. I really do. And I did purchase it because I was excited about it. It reminded me a little bit of the same kind of feelings I felt for the Sigma Enchanted palette. Like, I looked at it and I was like, God, there's just something about that palette that really talks to me, that really makes me want it. This just was not a great palette, and I even struggled with putting it underneath this as far as #8, because it's just not an amazing palette. But I would say that the looks I can come up with out of this palette, even though this does have, you know, a more cool tone vibe to it, are so much prettier than the ones that I get from the Norvina palette. While I do love the Norvina palette and do love some of the looks that I get from it, I don't pull the same kind of looks from it that I pull from this. And this has 2 of my absolute favorite shades in the ABH lineup, and they are these 2 here. So that's Jode and OA. Such stunning shades. Let me just show you. Such stunning shades. But what I will say is they're super, super similar, and I'm not sure that they both need to be in the same palette. So this one is Jode and this one is OA. And what I would say is OA is a little bit more of a like glitter based formula. Jode is more of a like a satiny shimmer. They're just so pretty, and I think that that is really the reason why I rank it above the Norvina palette, is because those 2 shades are stunning. However, they're the only 2 shadows in this palette that I feel are so stunning and unique to my collection, and therefore it ranks down towards the bottom of my ABH list. And really, when I look at the palette sitting in front of me, like, I couldn't imagine this one coming in any bigger and better than these ones. So the next one I have is this, and it is actually one that I quite love, but it is just not a color story that I think is like an everyday color story. It's definitely a companion piece to my collection versus a, you know, standalone palette. It's not one that I can take with me on the road and know that I'm gonna have everything I want, which is weird to say, but it is the Alyssa Edwards palette. I do love this palette, and there are some really stunning eye looks that I can come up with out of this palette. But this palette is definitely more of a companion type palette just because of the sheer brightness of the color story. And I would say that not all of these shadows are fantastic, and I would also say that this is mostly matte, and it is a palette that I do love, but it is a palette that I don't pull for unless I am looking for that crazy pop of color. All of these are beautiful shadows, but there's only 3 shimmers in here. It's this one, and this one. So with one of the shimmers being gold, which I'm not super impressed with, and the other 2 shimmers really not being fantastic shimmers. They're pretty. The purple is definitely better than the pink one in my opinion, but it's just, I like a 50-50 blend, to be honest, and it's also just a color story that really screams companion versus one and done. So for that reason, this one does come in at number 6 in my ABH ranking. I'm really kind of surprising myself. Here's the true tea to it too, you guys. I want you to know that when I do these ranking videos, I don't go into it knowing what my rank is. I lay all the palettes out in front of me, I start the camera, and then I pick which ones speak to my soul the most. You know, if you asked me a year ago how I would rank these, it might look very different. If you asked me a year from now how I would rank these, it might look very different. And that's really what I think about when it comes to this. So top 5, you guys, we're in the top 5 here, and this actually kind of shocks me. The next palette I have in the ranking at number 5 would be Soft Glam. This shocks me because of its color story. You all know this is not my favorite color story. I do not like browns and golds, and this palette has 3 golds. But I just did my palette roulette on this palette, and every single eye look I got out of that looked amazing on my eyes. And I just feel like it is so, so pretty. It's got 5 shimmers in it. It's got the rest of them matte, so it's got a good mix. Not a 50-50 split, but a good mix. It is a little more warm in nature, and I do love warm tones on my eyes. And even though this looks so brown, it's actually very orange and very red. And those are 2 of the colors that I love to put on my eyes. I love pinks, I love purples, I love reds, I love oranges. Today I am wearing all the colors that I told you that I did not like, which is the gold and the browns. This look is not from this palette, but I could pull, except for this pop of crazy yellow in the corner, I could pull this eye look from this. I firmly feel like this eye look could come from this palette, and I love this eye look. So the difference is that this eye look is comprised of 1 palette and 3 different singles because I couldn't pull what I needed from the 1 palette, and this is just 1 palette. I do love this palette. I do think that this is a phenomenal neutral toned eyeshadow palette. This is like, could be my 1 neutral toned eyeshadow palette in my collection, and as it stands, it may be someday, well, besides the Sultry, because that's not going anywhere either. But I really had a good time with this. I think it's coming in a little further down the way, so like the 5th of top 5, because I've only used it a handful of times, and that was over a week's time when I was reviewing it for my palette roulette series. I imagine it could be top 3 top 2 even at some point in time, but not today. So the next one I am going to show you is my number 4, and my number 4 would be the ABH Prism palette. This one actually, I kind of went back and forth with on where it needed to be in my ranking, because it's not necessarily the easiest palette to use. This is the color story, and you can see that it is kind of a crazy color story. I do think that I got some really great looks out of this palette when I have used it in the past. One of the reasons why it ranks in the top 5 for me, or a couple of the reasons I guess why it ranks in the top 5 for me, is this crazy color right here, which is just a pretty amazing like neon chartreusey green, which I absolutely love. This shade right here called Throne is also just such a beautiful shade for your lid. Do you see that like reflect in it? This shade right here, oh my gosh, you guys, this reminds me of Jode in the Carli Bybel palette. I loved it. And then Lucid, which is this one right here, even though this is not my favorite shade in this palette, and it's actually one that a lot of people had issue with when it first came out, is this really pretty inner corner brow bone shade that is like this white turned gold. I don't like golds, right? But I do like this one because it's not like overpowering gold. It's not like gold in your face gold. I love this bronze here. This bronze is such an amazing bronze tone. It could like sway orange depending on what you're putting with it. I also really rather like that the cool tones that are in this palette are some of my favorite to wear on my eyes, like this like mauve tone right here is just a really pretty like grayish kind of tone. I really do like this palette. As much as I think this palette got shit, one of my top 3 also got a whole lot of shit. I'm not out here saying like I just like to be a rebel and I just like to tell people who don't like certain things that they don't know what they're talking about, but I've had a really great time with some of the palettes that everybody else hates, to be honest. So for number 4, it would have to be the ABH Prism palette. Top 3, y'all. You know what's left in my collection. I'm certain that you do. Do you know where I rank them? Number 3 for me would have to be my very first ABH palette, and that is the ABH Modern Renaissance. I really do feel like this could partner very nicely with the Soft Glam palette. I also feel like this could partner very nicely with the Sultry palette when I do get it out and start using it. This is the color story of the ABH Modern Renaissance palette. You all have probably seen it about 800,000 times. When this first came onto the market, like YouTube lost their minds over this crazy warm toned like reds shadow palette. And what I would say is that the reds in this palette aren't really, as we're finding later on down the road, right? They're not really super red. Let's be honest. The reason why I say that this would partner very well with Soft Glam is because there are actually 3 shades in this palette that are also in Soft Glam. But with that said, the 3 shades in this palette that are in Soft Glam are a little bit of a different color than the ones that are in Soft Glam. So they either lean a little bit more warm or a little bit more cool. I do think that this color story is beautiful. This is the oldest, I think, living palette still in my collection. I really should buy another one and replace this one, but God, it's just going, it's still going strong. Like, look at these reds. I think that it's still going super strong, and I don't think that you can tell a huge difference on camera, but one of them is more of a brick red and one of them is more of a pinky red. It still blends very nicely. It's still just a beautiful shadow palette. I just have super fond memories with this palette. I think that's why it's going to probably consistently be in top 3 for me. But I really do love the color story of this. I do think it looks great on my eyes. It would be my perfect everyday eyeshadow palette because it is browns, but it's more reds and oranges and has some just really beautiful looks that can be pulled from it. So top 2, my number 2 palette is one that got a whole hell of a lot of hate here on YouTube, and I happen to love it. So deep down inside of my soul, I am a grungy girl, a grungy princess, a grungy colorful girl. So if you know me at all or familiar with my channel at all, you should know which two come into the top two, and it's definitely based on color story. So this would be my number 2 palette. This is the ABH Subculture. I remember when this launched, we found out it was launching. I had my timer set on my phone. I knew exactly when I needed to be on the ABH website. I think this is the first time I ever jumped on a launch the way I did for ABH. Like, I was in the middle of a meeting with my district manager and was like, hold up, I need to take 5 minutes. I went on to ABH, I ordered the palette, I said, okay, we're good, and I went on with my day. I needed to have this palette so badly that I didn't even wait for it to come to Ulta, which is, back then, I wasn't working at Ulta, but I didn't even wait for it to come because I was like, it's going to sell out, and I need to have it. So, I ordered it, and then there was, before I got it, there was all of these influencers on the YouTubes complaining about the palette. I dreaded getting it and trying to work with it. And I will say that this color story is not the easiest to work with, but it is such a beautiful color story. What they were having problems with was that this formula was different, that it was softer, that they were digging into the shades and hitting pan in the shades after first time use. You guys can see mine looks used for sure, but you can see that there's no pan hit. I've owned this since it came out. I don't have a problem with this palette. I have never had a problem with this palette. While I will say it is a little bit trickier as far as the shades, some of them not playing well together. I've never had a problem with the powderiness of it or almost hitting pan in a shade, and I think that the biggest reason why is because I just have never went all into a palette thinking that I needed to put all the color on my brush. I love this palette. Probably my favorite shades in this palette are these two here, which are All Star and Rowdy. So this one here and this one here. They are my favorite two to use. They are great for deepening up. One thing that I do not like about this palette is that there are only 3 shimmers. So you have this one here, and this one here. And none of them are really spectacular. Adorn, however, is a really pretty like brassy copper color. This cube shade is a white to pink. And then Electric is this really pretty like green. I do love them, but they're not my favorite shimmers from the ABH formula. But this color story wins me over every single time. When I think of fall, my first thought goes to ABH Subculture. When I think of grungy girl looks, grungy, like the epitome of my favorite eye looks, my first thought goes to Subculture. When I think of ease of use, this isn't my first thought palette, and that is why it ranks in at number 2. When I think of ease of use, a color story I love, grungy eye looks, fall eye looks, even love story eye looks, this is the palette that I think of every single time. This would be my number 1 ABH palette. ABH and Jackie Aina together were just chef's kiss. They came up with the most beautiful color story, the most talked about palette. I don't know if it's the most talked about palette because they didn't let her have her moment, or if it's the most talked about palette because it is the most pretty color story, or the best ABH formulation, or I don't know. There was something about this Wigglies shade, I think. There's some kind of flack going on about that, but these purples are beautiful purples. These reds and pinks, beautiful reds and pinks. This shade right here, oh my God, such a pretty green. Man, this is such a beautiful eyeshadow palette. So I know that this is a lot of people's #1 for ABH, and I have to think in my mind, why though? I'm not sure why. For me, I can tell you it's because it has a good number of mattes to shimmers. It has a good number of browns versus color. I think that it has also those duochromes in there. I can think of, like, you know, Sponsored, which is the green that I just showed you, and then Trust Issues, which is this white that is actually a gold. Again, it looks very much like the one that I showed you from Prism. It has, you know, a good couple of golds in there for our gold friends. I think that even the golds in here are not ugly golds. They're like copper penny gold or a bronzy gold or even an olive toned gold. I think that she thought of everybody when she was making this palette, and it shows. I don't think the other ones were in everybody kind of palettes. So for many, many reasons, and I would be interested to hear what your ranking is. Hopefully I got you some pictures in here. Hopefully you saw that there are reasons why I choose these. I just think that some of my favorite eye looks my most favorite eye looks came from these two palettes when I think through the lens of my ABH collection. ABH is a brand out there that a lot of people love to hate on. They have fallout, pretty significant fallout in their palettes if you don't know how to work with them. You could probably hit pan in almost every single one of their palettes the first time you use them, if you dig in like you dig into a Wet n Wild palette. Probably. They're soft shadows. They're beautiful shadows. So, I mean, even soft to the touch. Their pigmentation, their longevity, they are the only eyeshadows that I have in my collection that I know for fact could look the same as the second I put them on 18 hours later, because I have pictures to prove it. So I just think that, like, there's a lot of people out here hating on ABH all the time, and that's okay. That is their prerogative, and that's what they want to do. But I wanted to bring something positive into the world today and tell you how I rank my palettes. I do not have the Amrezy, which came out in the last couple years. I think it came out last year at some point. I also don't have the minis, but pretty much every 14 pan eyeshadow palette that they put out in their Rocket Fire eyeshadow palettes, and since I started in this game 3.5 years ago now, I have. So I thought that I needed to come to you, show you my palettes, and walk through the rankings with them. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that if you did, you're considering giving it a big thumbs up. Let me know if you agree with my ranking, and if not, where would you rank these palettes? Where do you rank the ones that you have in your collection? I'd be interested to hear. Thank you guys again so much for coming to visit me today. I appreciate you stopping in, watching my video, and I hope that you liked it or me enough that you're considering subscribing to my channel before you go. Giving it a big thumbs up, letting YouTube know that this video is watched out there, and hitting that notification bell. I do upload content 3 to 4 times a week, every single week, and I would hate for you to miss anything. So hitting that notification bell is going to assure that you don't. Y'all, I just hope that 2021 is treating you kindly out there. I hope that you and yours are staying safe and staying well and staying healthy and wearing your mask when you're out in public, if for no other reason but to protect yourself. I also hope that you all are loving each other, but loving each other from afar. I would please leave me comments down in the comments section telling me where you would rank your ABH palettes or mine. What are your top 3 even? And until next time, bye y'all.